can. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is our second week, but third session of Faith and Reason Attaining Yaqeen in the Modern World course or series of classes. So inshallah, we'll begin with unity of God and its implications in belief and in our practice, but in particular in its relationship to Yaqeen, certainty. Don't forget, this course is about certainty and how faith and reason interact. And more importantly, we want to increase our certainty as a result of the discussions that we have. So last week we talked about existence of God, and after existence of God comes unity of God. And that has really important implications. I just want to begin with the story of a young man who once asked me, why don't we see God? He just wanted to see God. This was years ago, early 1990s, when I was going to Redfern Mosque to classes there. Those two brothers, they really had a rough life, and also they were doing just about everything, alcohol, drugs, night clubbing. One of them, thankfully, started coming to the mosque, but his brother was still night clubbing, drinking, and so on. So one day, when we were in the mosque, I said to him, let's call your brother. This is like Friday night, or I don't remember, maybe it was Friday or Saturday night, but like 10 o'clock, something like that. It's just when everyone's just going out and having fun. We said, let's call him and let's ring him up and let's call him to the mosque. And we rang him up. It was just trying to see whether he would do that. I didn't think that he would come. But he said, okay, I'll come. I don't know what happened at the nightclub. Maybe he got some upset. But it was just the right time to call him. And we called and he said, okay, I'm coming. And we immediately got into the car, went to wherever he was. And it was just a half an hour drive there and half an hour back to the Redfern. And on the way, so we picked him up, and I remember it was also raining in the middle of the night. The car that we were driving wasn't like that. I think it was just a Torana, one of those old Toranas. And I was in the back seat with this brother. And we started talking about life, about his lifestyle, religion, and then the discussion came to God. And I was really happy. And that's when he asked me the question. He said, Brother Mehmet, why don't we see God? Why doesn't God show himself to us? And I can sort of sense that he was asking that question as if only God showed himself to me, I would really believe in him and I would lead a good life. But that's part of the test, isn't it? And we had a really good discussion. But what he was really seeking was, or behind that question was, he wanted to be certain. He wanted to feel but the only way he can do that was if he felt the presence of God. So there's a relationship between yaqeen, certainty in faith, and the way we feel the presence of God. And tawhid is linked to it very tightly, and that's what I want to discuss, inshallah, in this particular class. Now, I had a long answer, and in my answer, basically I said to him that, if you were to see God like you see the sun every day, you would get used to it. And you look up in the sky, you wake up in the morning, you get out of the house, somehow God is in the sky. Like, what do you want? What do we expect? Do we expect God to walk with us like other human beings? Again, you would get used to, you probably wouldn't believe that's a God or not. Or should God appear in the sky like the sun? And then even if he did, every morning you'd get up and say, oh God, how are you? Or you probably forget, isn't it? How many of us look up at the sun every day? Even though the sun is there, very close to us, shining upon us, we don't. I'm not here I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not comparing God to the sun, but when we say see God, what do we mean? And this is what Musa alayhi salam, as you know, the prophet Moses, he wanted to see God. When he was in Mount Sinai, when he was on Mount Sinai, he said, oh God, show me yourself. Now, why did Musa alayhi salam ask that question? Didn't he believe? He believed. But he wanted to, he asked that question for three reasons perhaps. One, he was curious how God looked like, perhaps. He wanted to see the beauty of God and or whatever he was imagining, or people imagine God to be. The second reason is he wanted to be certain in his faith. You remember last week, certainty of knowing is different to certainty of seeing. It's a certainty of seeing is higher. And thirdly, he wanted to go back to the Israelites and say, I saw God, believe in me. Because when he left them, they were still, it was really the Israelites, his followers, who were not certain about God. So he wanted to witness God and then come back to the people and say, I saw God. Have that certainty of in his message, in his voice. Anyway, and then as the Quran goes, he says, look at that mountain. And so God manifested himself slightly more intensely to that mountain. The Quran calls it yatajalla. Tajalla means manifesting or showing. Like when your image, for example, shows on a projector, we call that you manifested on the wall. Like your image manifested on the wall. Like we don't know what manifested on the mountain, but the mountain has crushed or burnt from the intensity of that manifestation. Now, the way we can understand that is like God's creativity, or we might say presence, is always there. It's always there in an intensity that we can bear. But when that intensity increases a little bit, then things can be destroyed. Bit like, the sun at the moment, when the sun shines, we feel the heat a little bit, just comfortable. But if we were to get right next to the sun, the intensity would burn us, wouldn't it? So a bit like that. So in a way, and then I said to him, look, when you say you want to see God, it's an impossible ask, because the Creator is not of the same kind as the created. And here in the slides, I gave the example of art, and the artists are of different kind. Like when you see a beautiful painting, the painter is completely different to the painting. This image is Bob Ross. Bob Ross was before YouTube, he had all these videos about how to paint, and like CDs, or it appeared on TV. I used to love watching that. He is the quickest guy. In 10 minutes, he would draw this fantastic scenery. But isn't it like the painting is made up of paint, but the artist is made up of flesh and blood. So while we are made up of flesh and blood, the creatures are made up of atoms and particles and so on, the God who's the creator is not of the same substance, or not of the same essence of what is created. So therefore, it's impossible for us to see God, or God manifest himself as he truly is in this universe. There are also aspects to that about being tested. For us to be tested, God needs to be in the background. But also this, the chapter from Quran, Surah Ikhlas. Put your hand up if this was the first part of the Quran you memorized? Yeah, most of us, Kul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Now, one of the most interesting aspect of this passage from the Quran is that God is not God does not beget, nor He is begotten. What that means is that God does not give birth, or no one gave birth to God. Now, why use that? Why use that expressions? Like, look at these images. You have a pregnant woman, and the pregnant woman gives birth to a baby. Now, when a woman gives birth to a baby, the baby is of the same kind as the one who gives birth. Now, this is what Quran is rejecting. That Quran is saying that God is unlike of His creation. That's why وَلَمْ يَكُلْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ comes straight after that. That God is unlike any of His creation. Also, another thing about childbirth is that when a woman gives birth to a child, the child, when it was in the womb, it was dependent on the mother for everything. But when it gets out, it becomes independent of the mother in its existence. See, whereas we, the creatures of God, are not completely independent of God. But yet God is completely independent of us. So therefore, there is no relationship of begetting or being begotten. That's why this is very important. Obviously, the quite obvious meaning of this God is not begotten nor does He beget is to reject the idea that God is a product of other gods, the mythology, Greek mythology that people believed at the time as well. I don't know if he was convinced at the time with my answers, but we had a really good discussion. I was really happy that he came to the mosque. He came a few more times and I don't know, he disappeared after that. But that's the journey of life, isn't it? Sometimes people come to mosque, sometimes they don't. Now, the word Allah, which means God, it's made up of two words, al-ilah. Like in Arabic, the word ilah means God. El means the. So it's Allah means the God. As one of the Arabic grammarians, Sibawayh, explained. And it's the word that most appears in the Quran, the word Allah. 2,153 times. And the word Rabb also means Lord, appears 1,250 times. Now the entire Quran has about 78,000 words in the entire book. So from that, you can tell that maybe 5-10% of the entire Quran is just names of God. The other names are also repeated often in the Quran. So this is a page from the Quran. You can see the word Allah, how it's repeated often, on the page. And can you see something on this particular print? The word Allah, the three words are aligned vertically. This is a very miraculous feature of the Quran. Like I have a Quran that's written like this, all the words Allah written in red, and whichever page they appear, if it appears multiple times, it's always aligned. It's amazing. So you're certain to just increase the... Okay, so obviously Allah, God exists, and then, well, maybe I can say that there's really three fundamental questions about God in theology, in belief. Three fundamental questions. The first one is, does God exist? Second one is, if so, is there only one God or many? And the third question is, how do I relate to God? So this is three fundamental questions of theology or belief in God. And we talked about existence of God last week, so now we're talking about tawhid, or unity of God. So Islam's answer is to this, every religion must answer these three questions. So Islam's answer is, does God exist? Yes. Is God one? Yes. And absolutely one. And that there is no other God. Probably Islam is the only religion that emphasizes that the opposite of tawhid, which is shirk. I'm going to come to that a little bit later, also tonight. So what does tawhid mean? Tawhid in Arabic means to unify, unification, or to making something one is tawhid. The word wahad means one. Tawhid is the verb noun. In Islamically, in Islam, it means the unity and absolute unification of God as one and true God without partners. And also the Prophet, peace be upon him, there's a very famous passage how he defined tawhid. La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu, and so on. It goes in. And it means there is no deity but Allah. He is one. He has no partner. His is the dominion, that is everything that exists. His is the praise, hamd. He grants life and He deals death, and He is living and dies not. All good is in His hands, and is powerful over all things, and to Him is the return. Once I did a lecture entirely on this particular expression. Now you can do a whole 1 hour class on this. Why those words are chosen, how are they related? They're all related. This basically gives the concept of God in Islam, in a nutshell. Why is that important? Why does Quran emphasize those things? He does not die, He's living, everything belongs to Him, He's the one who gives life, He's the one who takes life. Why is this important? It's because in the ancient world, which Islam came the 7th century, people believed that different laws were applicable on Earth and in the cosmos, in the stars and the galaxies. When they looked up in the sky, by the way, the ancient people saw a lot more when they looked up in the sky than what we see at night. How many stars do you see at night these days? One? In a good night, maybe you'll see the Big Dipper, you'll see various features, around 20, 30 stars. But look at that image, you can see the whole Milky Way. Once I went to Dabo for a community talk. I was talking about Islam. And at night, it was amazing that there were countless stars. The reason why we don't see stars in Sydney is because the light from Sydney goes into the sky and blinds the light from the stars. Or the light from Sydney shines brighter than the stars. And that's why we are unable to see it. And hopefully, midwives, when we go to the island, we'll see a lot of stars, inshallah.
You need to go to the desert.
Yeah, desert or inland where there's not much light. And then, see, when the ancient people did that, when they looked up in the sky, they saw countless stars, but they were always remaining in the same spot. Like they could not detect any movement. But whereas everything else on earth was changing, moving, dying, being born, and they felt that those laws was not applicable for the sky. So that's why they imagined perhaps the things in the sky were gods. They determined what was happening on earth. Like that was the first man-made religions appeared that way in terms of the stars, the moon, or the sun. They believed them to be gods. Like this is why in the story of Abraham, when he looks at, when he's talking, he says, here's are stars. Are these gods? No, they disappeared. Anything disappears cannot be God. What about the moon? What about the sun? But they all disappear. So then he realized. Actually, that story, a lot of people misunderstand that story in the Quran. Some people, unfortunately, even some scholars, they interpret that story of Abraham to mean that he temporarily believed that the stars, the moon, or the sun were gods, and then he realized they could not be gods. There was only one God. That wasn't the main thing. That's a wrong interpretation in my view. The reason is that the verse before all of that says that Abraham was shown the inner workings of the heavens and earth, and he attained certainty. Remember the verse I gave last week? That comes before the story of the stars, moon, and the sun. So what Ibrahim a.s. was doing was, he was talking to people. Because the people in his time, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, and they worshipped the stars, the moon, and the sun as gods. So he was talking to them, he was bringing people into what they believed, and just temporarily saying, can these be gods? No, they can't. He was arguing to them and trying to convince them that there was only one God, and these things can only be creation, not the creator. But it was a very powerful influence on the people that they really believed the sky was different. And then later polytheism became, especially in Arabia, they said that, there is a God, the biggest God is in the sky. Then there are lesser gods on earth. And this is what Arabs before Islam believed. They called Allah, the God, was the God in the sky, and but other gods, that Lat, Manat, Uzza, they were the gods of love, gods of the agriculture, the animals, all the wind, and all of those things had separate gods in polytheism. Now this is what Quran was arguing against, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, arguing against. And that's why, for example, in this verse in the Quran, it says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي فِي السَّمَاءِ إِلَهٌ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَهٌ وَهُوَ الْحَكِيمُ الْعَلِيمُ. Interesting, isn't it? The meaning is, and it is Allah, and it is He who is the God in the heaven and God on the earth. And He is the wise and knowing. So what Quran is saying, also doesn't Quran say, Allahu Rabbus Samawati wal Ard? Right? He's the God of the heavens and the earth. Like this is what Quran, the Prophet ﷺ was making distinct. This is a very important point in tawhid. Like that Allah, or the God, the one God, is the God of entire existence, whether that's earth, whether that's cosmos. And by the way, this was, when there's a famous incident when this woman, she was a slave, and the Prophet, they didn't know whether she was a Muslim or not, and the Prophets asked, ask her where God is, or what God she believes. And they asked her, she says, I believe in the God in the sky. And then the Prophet said, okay, she's a Muslim. And the reason for that was, again, what was the God in the sky? Allah. That was a way to distinguish true God from other man-made gods. It doesn't mean location. And always, humanity, we always imagined divinity in upward direction anyway. Like when you pray, what do? You don't look into the ground, right? You look up. And so there is that natural feel of God representing infinity being in that upward direction. Otherwise, if we believe in literally to this, what this verse means, You have to imagine that God is on earth, in earth, like fil ard. He is God in earth or on earth. But the point of these verses is that we cannot, He is the God that governs the entire universe and existence. Right? That's the main point. Okay, so this brings us to two types of tawhid, and it's how that's related to yaqeen. The first one is what we call ordinary appreciation of tawhid. And this is maybe even your mother could argue, your grandmother could argue. When you ask your grandmother, how do you understand one God? She says, son, this entire universe, everything is created by God. Look at how big the sky is, universe is. Just you think about creation and you say everything is created by God. And that's sufficient explanation. I mean, at least you should be able to explain tawhid like that. But there's a deeper appreciation of tawhid, which is to investigate and find a signature or ayah of pointing to God in everything in the world and in the universe, and understand that everything is created and governed by God. Now, this is the really deeper understanding of tawhid. It's a bit like, imagine there's a big tournament, right? There's a big tennis, Wimbledon. At the moment, there's Wimbledon is playing. Like when, what's that guy's name? The number one? Omar, you would know. Who's the number one tennis player? Djokovic or Nadal? Is he number one? Is it Nadal? Okay. Anyway, when I was watching the other day, late at night when I was resting a little bit, Nadal came out to play. He had this Nike symbol everywhere, on his headband, on his t-shirt, on his shoes, the tick sign. That's what we call trademark, isn't it? Imagine if all the players had that Nike shirt or Nike trademark. You looked at the billboards, it had the Nike symbol. You looked at the balls, you caught a ball, you looked at it, Nike. So everything about those things is telling you that this tournament is organized by Nike, isn't it? So, whereas if you look at the entire Wimbledon tournament and you say, okay, someone's organized it, but I don't know who. Maybe even some people were sharing it together. They were organizing it together. So there's always a propensity to split into or sway into shirk anytime when the understanding of tawhid is weak and then we don't fully appreciate it or deeper. There's a tendency to go into shirk. Whereas if you really understand it, when you see that trademark everywhere, made by God. You look at a fly, made by God. Look at a sun, made by God. You kind of read that trademark that this is created by God, then your certainty increases. Your understanding of tawhid deepens, and that you would never go into shirk with that understanding. So one day, like this is important because some years ago, I think it was 2004, we did these we called it home encounters, where like 5 Muslims, 5 Christians, we met in homes once a month, and we talked about a topic each month. And we did it for 6 months. And we had 6 groups, but it was actually a very, very good organization. Like we had 6 groups. Each group had 5 Muslims, 5 Christians, and we met for 6 months. And one of the topics was obviously concept of God. So let's say a Muslim would present, this is what we believe. A Christian would present, this is what we believe. And I think I was doing, in the group that I was in, I did the presentation on the concept of God. And at some stage, I used the word, associating partnership in God is forbidden in Islam. And one of the Christian ladies asked me, what does associating partnership mean? I was really surprised she asked me that question. I said, it means, if you attribute or if you divide God's divinity or His lordship, everything that's creative, God's attributes, God creates everything, He governs everything, He has all the divine attributes. No one else does. And that's what we mean. But if anybody does the opposite, that becomes associating partnership. She said, okay. Then I asked her, don't you have that concept? She said, no. Can you see the implication of that? Like when you do not define shirk or tawhid properly, and you don't define shirk, what can happen is you can easily go into that without even noticing and realizing. Now, how do we know that God is one? Is there evidence for this? Other than obviously the Quran's declaration and statement. Well, the Quran itself argues a famous point. I think most Muslims know this verse. If there were in the heavens and the earth other gods besides Allah, there would have been confusion in both, but glory to God, the Lord of the throne. High is He above what they attribute to Him. So once again, it's heavens and the earth, right? That heavens and the earth are not subject to different laws. Because if they were subject to different laws, what would happen? Chaos. You wouldn't be able to communicate. Like for example, I have my phone. I used to do this job, so I know the communication protocols behind mobile communication. There's actually a very complex communication protocol. And if the receiver, when I make a call, there's also these towers. I don't know if you've seen those. They receive the call, and they follow the same protocol. It's only in that way I'm able to communicate using this device. So otherwise, if the phone manufacturer used different protocol, the manufacturer of the towers used different protocol, there would be chaos. When there's chaos, there will be ruin. And this is what this Quran is arguing in this. What it's saying is that, if there were more than one God, then there would be chaos, as each God would want to exert their sovereignty and will on the universe. And because when we observe the universe, there's a perfect order and harmony, even though there is, comings and goings, input and output between Earth and the cosmos. Most significant one is the sunlight and other matter that comes in. And therefore there is only one God who governs the universe through a set of harmonious laws. This is a very fundamental principle of science, that the laws are applicable everywhere equally. I guess that's the point that the Quran is making. If that wasn't the case, then you wouldn't have order, you'd have disorder in the universe. Yeah?
Isn't there a law of science which says that everything tends to destruction or chaos? That's the third law of thermodynamics.
Yeah, I think it's the second law of
thermodynamics.
The first law of thermodynamics says that. What's the first law? The first law, I think it says the heat only flows in one direction. The second law says that everything goes to disorder, entropy. It's called entropy. So what that means is that if you leave things to themselves, it just disintegrates and gets destroyed. Because the reason is that heat is flowing only in one direction. Now, that's actually, you can say that second law of thermodynamics is evidence for both existence of God and unity of God. It's an evidence for unity of God because that law is same everywhere. But it's a evidence for existence of God because if you were to leave everything to themselves, everything should, like for example, there shouldn't be any life right now in the universe because the age of the universe is 15 billion years. So it's been 15 billion years and then we still have life on Earth. Like having life on Earth, it means it's ordered. It's not disorder. Earth's been around for 4.5 billion years. It has still order. It's not disorder. And the way that's done is that you harness. If you harness the flow of energy, then you can produce order from that. But that requires design. But let me give you an example with the cars. You know, how does the car works? There's an engine. You know, the petrol gets vaporized in the cylinders of the engine, and then that's exploded. There's a spark, an explosion takes place, and that the pressure produces movement, and then because of the way the cylinders and the pistons are designed, that creates movement. So basically, when the petrol burns, that's disorder, because petrol has energy in it and it's ordered. But when you're burning, you're calling disorder. But you're harnessing the energy released from that to make the car move, or engines or other technology. Everything just ties to that. Now, look at the Earth. The Earth uses exactly the same. Life on Earth uses exactly the same thing. Like there are mechanisms and systems in place, which has to be by design, otherwise, because there's a purpose. If you just leave it to itself to chance, it should be disorder once again. Like, it's a very powerful evidence, this one, you know. Inshallah, just think about it. It's a bit scientific, but if you really understand it, it's a very powerful evidence for God's existence. Okay, there's another equally, I really like this second one, what we call law of interconnectedness argument for God's unity. So one of the things we observe in the universe is that everything is interconnected. Again, one of the, like for example, if there were, like imagine if there were more than one God in a real sense. I mean, the classic scholars explain this to say, they said, here's a rock. The scholar says, here's a rock, so there's a God A, there's a God B. The God A says to the rock, move. God B says, don't move. He goes, that's what's going to happen. Like, is it going to move or not move? Now, if it moves, that means the first God was more powerful than the second God. And that renders, then the second God cannot be God, because someone else is more powerful than him. And so they kind of explained it that way. It's a really clever argument, that one. But I like this interconnectedness argument. Basically what it says is that everything is connected to such an extent that whoever created a single thing must be the creator of the whole universe. Like, there's no gaps in there at all. There's no gaps where another entity could claim some sort of creative power. Like, for example, an apple. So for an apple to exist, what do you need? Apple is dependent on the tree, isn't it? But you cannot get an apple without the tree. And the fact that this tree may have thousands of apples does not matter. So even if you're going to produce one apple, this entire tree is needed. And that tree in itself cannot exist without the earth, isn't it? And the sun. Like even if the whole earth has only one apple tree, you still need the whole earth and the sun. And for earth and the sun to exist, you need the entire universe to exist. And the entire universe has to exist in the size that it does. Like you need those massive distances. Again, for those massive laws of gravity to be moderated and to work nicely for delicate beings like human beings and animals, plants to live. Like we are extremely delicate when you look at the cosmic powers and the temperatures and all of those things that exist in the universe. Like just to give you an example, you know black holes, you must have heard black holes. They say that, who watched the movie Interstellar? You know, in that movie, the guy, Matthew McConaughey, goes into the black hole and lives. But really, when you ask the scientists, is that possible? They say no. Like what happens is, there's a word called spaghettification. Like because the gravity of black hole is so big, so high that the gravity at your foot will be different to your head. So as you're going down, your body will be stretched, and you're down to the atom, like a single atom. Like your body will just be a long spaghetti, and you'll go into black hole like that. That's why it's called spaghettification. Hard word to pronounce. How did we get to that? All right, law of interconnectedness, yes. Yeah, so like, can you see with this example or with this argument that there's no gap there? Everything is dependent on something else. That's why in Surah Ikhlas, Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad. Like samad comes immediately after ahad. Ahad means unique. Like wahad means one, ahad means unique. But there's a big difference because you can say, oh, this is just one, this phone, but you can't say unique because it's mass produced. Everything is the same. So Allah is God is not only one, but He's unique. There's nothing like Him. But Samad means has two meanings. One, a meaning of eternity, that God is not only one and is unique, but He's eternal. But it also means that He doesn't need any of His creation. You could write a book on Surah Ikhlas, like even though it's only one line in the Quran, it's arguments, so you can just expand that. There's a lot is said in those 6 expressions. And by the way, it's also perfectly balanced because the first 3, like Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, affirming tawhid in 3 ways. Then lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad rejects shirk in 3 ways as well. It's perfectly balanced. Okay, so this naturally brings us to the idea of shirk, or the concept of shirk, which is the opposite of tawhid. In Arabic, it means to divide into parts, to establish partnership, or to divide into shares. Like companies in Arabic has the same root word, because a company is made up of people who partners, or they all bring in shares together. Shirkat or shirka or something like that. But theologically, shirk means associating partners with God in a way that violates pure unity of God, or tawhid. And there are, Quran rejects this very powerfully, that God has no partners. Like this one is very interesting. It's almost, whoever associates any partners with God, it is as if he fell down from the heaven, and thereupon the wild birds of prey snatch him away, and the wind blows him away into a distant abysmal ditch. It's very powerful expressions. Like if you read it in Arabic as well, and also according to Quran, shirk is the only unforgivable sin if a person dies without repentance. That God says that God will forgive any sin unless other than shirk. Why is that? Like, why is God so persistent on this and so strong on this regard? What do you think? Why is shirk so bad or so offensive to God? There's no right or wrong answer. Like, I'm not looking for,
It makes you forget the existence of God.
Makes you forget existence of God? Yeah, how?
You get carried away with what you believe in or
But
what
if
you...
But if a person says there is a God, but also there's other gods, is he forgetting?
Because if whatever you believe in has to probably is something that you see, something that you're dealing with. So that's why you probably get carried away and forget about the existence.
Okay, yeah, it can lead to that, definitely. Yeah.
Is it because I think it is mentioned in the Quran that he's jealous and he loves his servant, and he loves his servant to love him only?
But why? I guess jealousy is a bit of a wrong word to use for God, because there is some deficiency or I guess some weakness.
I don't know how to.
Yeah. Maybe it's better to say that God is very particular and specific about that. It's something that He wants, that's why anything outside of that is not acceptable.
It contradicts the Shahada, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, in itself.
So it's contradicting, you could say contradicting truth. Like if there is really only one God and then these people are believing in these other false gods, if they're believing, look, if there is only one God in reality and that people are believing in many gods, it means they are making up these gods. So God is deeply offended by that. Yeah.
It's an infinite disrespect to God.
Infinite? Why is it infinite?
So for every atom that Allah has created, you're associating something else to it. So you're pretty much disrespecting every particle, every atom.
Or, Quran says that everything worships God or praises God, or they're basically, what are they doing when we say they praise God? They're really giving testimony to His existence, unity, like I said with the Nike example earlier. So, kind of like you're attributing, it's an act of infinite defamation. Yeah. Yes.
There's a verse in the Quran where Allah gives an example of a slave that has two masters, and how a slave that has two masters will never be able to fulfill anyone's command. So, our entry point into Islam is belief in the one God. To join partners with Him would sort of reflect back to that you never have fully submitted to Him. Something that.
Okay, that's looking at it from a human side, I guess. If a person, if they believe in God, you're tribalizing God. Like these fantasy movies, for example, they usually have these gods for each tribe. That is Conan the Barbarian. Conan meets a guy, he says, "Who's your God?" He goes, "My God is Chrome." "Who's your God?" Like they all have their tribal gods. My God is more powerful, and so on. And then you will never truly appreciate universality of, I guess, humanity and realize your potential in that way. You have a point. Yeah?
Sorry, I have a question relating to this. Say someone is they're an amazing person, they're pretty much the perfect, but they're raised in a community where they're not told that there is one God, that they worship idols, say they didn't have the opportunity to learn about a higher being. Are they still punished for that if they had no way of knowing there was something higher?
We're going to talk about that in judgment. Save your question, but just briefly, no one will be judged unfairly. If they had opportunity, that's what they will be judged for. If they haven't, they won't be judged. God is just. God is not unfair. The Quran says, why should God punish you if you do good? And scholars usually have two views on that. One says, they say, well, there's a verse in the Quran which says that God does not punish a people unless He sends messengers. So if there's if there's no messenger sent, the message hasn't received, God will not punish. Whereas another set of scholars says that, what that means is that they won't be punished for the prescriptions of religion because that message hasn't gone to them. Why didn't you pray? Why didn't you give charity or fast or something? You won't be punished for that. But everyone's given the ability to find a creator, as long as at least they should believe in one God, they say. God knows. But again, I think we should trust in God that He's not going to unfairly, God is not looking for reasons to punish people or throw them in hell. It's actually the opposite, that He's looking for reasons to forgive them. Say, just like that, that woman who fed a dog or gave dog a water, she was forgiven, put to paradise. I guess we're going to talk more about that when we talk about judgment, inshallah. Yes, Ibi?
I wanted to say it was very interesting how you mentioned why shirk is so offensive, because if you look at other major sins that you would think should be unforgivable, are unforgivable or not, others that cause harm to humanity, that bring out the worst of people, that are evil, this sort of, someone can commit shirk but still be a nice person or something. So why is it so offensive? It's a very good question. Why is it unforgivable too?
Yeah. Okay, well, that's what we're trying to answer. Yes?
To really think about, why it's so offensive to God is you need to have a basic intellect to think about this, to say what's the purpose of life. And usually, majority of people who I met, I myself experienced from the 12 or 13 years old, like when I sleep in the bed, I just can't sleep. What's the purpose of what I'm doing here? This is a basic intellect that people think about. And for the majority of people, Allah has given this intellect to let you think. And with those basic intellect, majority of people can come to the conclusion that doesn't matter what religion that is true, but at least there is some God. So majority of the Western people classify themselves as agnostic. I don't believe in religion, but I believe in there's one God, at least. And to have this kind of intellect and refuse to think, that's kind of insult to God, that you didn't use the resources that's available to you. And to think and still reject what you have concluded is another insult to God. So it doesn't matter which way it's done.
Well, you're right. There's that natural questioning, isn't it? It actually happens 3 times in a lifetime. When you first come to adolescence, you're a teenager, in your 30s and in your 50s.
Why is that?
You just question everything. I don't know. It's probably a chance for God has put in our programming spiritual DNA, so that by questioning, again, it allows you to correct yourself if you are in the wrong path or something. But if you're following the right path, you'll question and say, oh, okay, you'll have the certainty of knowing you're okay. Why? What that made you think?
Never mind.
Okay. All right. Well, why should you be scared of questioning things or, reflecting? When you say question, it's really reflecting. Who am I? I remember as well, I used to, when I was 15 years old, I used to look at in the mirror myself like this, and say, who's this guy? You just go like this, you check do I really exist? But it's a very funny feeling. I guess the questions change a little bit as well. It's not exactly the same questions. But you're right, it's really put in our spiritual DNA, so that we naturally seek the Creator. It's a natural instinctive impulse that's in us that makes us search God, search truth. But the thing is, unfortunately, then people they're going to go to the priest or the rabbi or the Buddhist monk, the imams first. So you get influenced by whichever society you're in as well. And in our time, unfortunately, the biggest influences is atheism. That's why a lot of young people are moving away from religion as a result of that questioning, even though they've been taught by their parents or the schools that they went to a particular religion. So let me give you an answer. Why is God so offended by shirk or associating partnership? Because shirk negates the entire purpose of existence, and that deeply offends God. Because, like, when you really look at, consider the universe, the entire universe is there to produce life. Like when I say, like, imagine you're Bill Gates, right? You've got $100 billion and you want to set up a new business. You put all your money into that business, $100 billion. Why are you'd be stupid if you didn't, he'd be stupid if he didn't want a result, right? So he has a purpose. He wants to get more out of that investment. Now, I mean, we're not comparing Allah to Bill Gates, harsha. But just imagine, like, the scale of the universe, right? The billions of stars. They say that there are 200 billion stars in Milky Way only. And that there are 400 billion galaxies in the universe. The scale is amazing. So all of that expense, the time, billions of years is spent to produce life, right? Just put that in your mind. Now, the finest product of life is human life. So out of all that life, the plants, insects, animals, the human being is the one who is conscious, who has the ability to recognize the Creator. Or even a human being is the only one that can contemplate that there could be a Creator. We talked about this last week. So therefore, like, human life is extremely valuable, or that entire universe produces life. All of that life is there to support and produce human life. Now, the finest product of human life is, to human intellect, the spirit and consciousness. Isn't it? Like, if you compare your nails and the toes that you clip away, throw out as worthless things, and your brain, they're not of the same value. And your consciousness is not of the same value as your eating and drinking. So the highest aspect of human being is the intellect, consciousness, and the spirit. Now, the finest fruit of all of these are belief and worship. Again, this time now we're looking at it from the perspective of the Creator. Creator is creating the entire universe to produce life, then the human being, and then he's giving human beings this consciousness and the spirit, intellect. And the most important, the best thing that those things can do is believe and worship. And then if you give all of that to some tree or some false god, or the Lat, Manat, Uzza, how are you going to feel if you were astaghfirullah God? You're going to feel deeply offended. So because, like, if with shirk, or shirk puts everything to futility and transfers the product, the fruit of the universe, human life and human existence, into something else other than God, when it should be God. And what does God want out of the universe? Like, if there is a God, what would God want out of the universe? The riches, the sun, the moon, the stars? No, he wants belief and worship. So it's a bit like the example I've given here with the images of a farmer. Like imagine a farmer, he plants, puts the seeds in the ground, plows the soil, works very hard, puts the fertilizers, then nurtures the plants, irrigates them, and just when he's about to get the harvest, something else comes and takes it away. How is he going to feel? Very angry, right? They say that potatoes, the good potatoes, grow in 3 years, and you've got 3 weeks to harvest the entire potatoes. And if the weather goes bad or someone else comes and takes it, you're angry. Yes, sister?
You know how if God, obviously if he wants everyone to worship him, he has the control to make everyone a believer. So it's not like, as in what I'm trying to understand is why would God be angry that some people choose to disbelieve? Because it's not reducing his power. Like if he really wanted those people to believe, he could. Like he's not gonna gain something from us because we're the creation.
Yeah, it's not about need, it's about purpose, sister. Like if I guess we're trying to understand God through what we know of concepts. Let's say you have the purpose of climbing Mount Everest. Do you do that because you need it? Because no, it's a purpose. Because you can do it. But God created the universe because he can. And then he wants a certain purpose, certain fruit, output from that. Not because he needs it, because he intended it to be that way. Now, in terms of human life, we'll talk about this next week more detail as well. I mean, yeah, God has the angels, which we'll talk about in the second session. Angels do a fantastic job worshipping God, glorifying, praising, but they have no option of not doing so. So only human beings have that option. So when humans choose to do it, it's extremely valuable, or more valuable than angelic worship. Because like humans have the ability to say no. Like today, for example, I took my sister to hospital. She broke her leg some time ago, like 10 months ago, and we've been going periodically to the hospital. They take X-ray. The X-ray, I went into the room. The X-ray was amazing. You can just see the leg and the bone, the metals that they put through her leg in the screen with this press of a button. That all of that X-ray or the CAT scan that they had does a fantastic job. But we never say that's a very merciful machine, do we? Because it doesn't have the option. It's just designed that way. Whereas when a human being does something, an act of kindness, generosity, we say, what a wonderful person, a generous person. Like you only acquire the attribute when it's an option. Without that, so what Allah wants with worship is to engage in a relationship with us. And yeah, we'll talk more about that next week, inshallah. It sort of puts things into futility. And there are different, I won't go into too much detail of these types of shirk, like shirk of atheism. Shirk of atheism basically says when a person doesn't accept a creator, all the divine attributes are split across the entire atoms and the particles, the things that exist in the universe. So by default it becomes shirk. The shirk in divinity is when people believe that the divinity, or like animals or human beings or entire universe has part of divinity in it. That becomes shirk. Shirk in lordship happens when people believe that certain entities also have creative powers, or they are governing parts of the universe. Shirk in names and attributes, again, when you say, for example, the universe is eternal, you're transferring God's eternal attribute to universe as well as God, that becomes shirk. And shirk in worship is when people worship things other than God. And sometimes, people don't realize that they're doing this. The last one, the shirk in worship. Once I had a very nice couple in my class. I was running classes in Sydney University. They were just beautiful human beings, and they were religious, but they were. Once I went to their house, they invited me to their house for coffee, and I went, and we had a conversation, and they said that they pray to saints and various other things other than God, because it's in their tradition. And the guy's name was Michael and her name was Jane, and I don't think you'll know. There's too many Michaels and Janes, I said to Jane, I said, "You believe in God, right, Jane?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Why do you then worship other things other than God? Why don't you just worship God directly?" She says, "Oh, yeah, no, we're still worshiping God. We're worshiping these saints because when you worship them, when you pray to them, because they are pure beings, they represent our prayer to God. If we go directly to God, we're not pure. We are sinners. It can be rejected." That's what was the rationale. I said, okay, how about this? Just think about, there's 3 of us in this room, Mehmet, Michael, and Jane. And Jane, I'm talking to you, and I'm saying, while Michael is in the room, "Jane, can you tell Michael that he forgives me, I did something wrong to him?" Or I said, "Michael, how do you feel about that? I'm talking to Jane about you, and I'm telling Jane to say something to you when you're in the room." He says, "Yeah, I'm really offended by that." Michael said. I said, "So does God see everything?" "Yes." "Does God hear everything?" "Yes." So if God is all hearing and all seeing and you're praying someone else, how will God think about that, right? So, really? Okay. They really understood why it was wrong or the problem associated with that, yeah.
On the topic of shirk, what's worse, disbelief or misbelief? So, disbelief atheism or shirk in divinity?
What do you mean by misbelief?
As in having the wrong, like that, what you just said.
What's worse? God. Really, let me put it this way, there's really 2 types of disbelief. Ultimately, there's non-existence of existence and existence of non-existence. You just have to think about that. Like when you say non-existence of acceptance, what you're saying is that the acceptance is not there yet. That's what we call agnosticism. People just haven't made up their mind. But acceptance of non-existence means someone is convinced that there is non-existence of God. So there's a conviction there. So in a way they have yaqeen in a negative sense, that they are convinced in their mind God doesn't exist. That is the worst form of, I guess, disbelief. And you get a lot of anti-religion, anti-God from people like that as well. So they become activist atheists, mock religion, mock believing people. Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins. I guess I'm mentioning their name because they're famous. They've got YouTube everywhere on YouTube. They have videos. Look, this is I guess belief and disbelief is inherently subjective in a sense that if you're a believer, you will only see the world in a particular way. If you're a disbeliever, you will also see the world in a particular way. Both of them create a worldview, and it's inescapable. I guess in a society in which we live in the modern world, we need to respect people's belief or disbelief. Even Quran respects it. It says, believe if you will, disbelieve if you will. You know, like as you said earlier, sister said, God doesn't need your belief and disbelief. But there is again the futility that comes with shirk, and there's an offense there, definitely.